And so I'm very pleased to have with us today Bonnie Fitzgerald and Kim Wozniak. Bonnie is the founder of Maverick Mosaics and Clay Studio, and Kim is the owner of Wits End Mosaics and Smalty.com. They, in the last few years, started a YouTube channel called Make It Mosaics. And now they have over 20,000 subscribers. So I thought I'd turn the program over to them. They can tell us a little bit about their YouTube channel, how they got started, and then we'll start with the questions that you submitted. So take it away.
Go for it, Bonnie.
Okay. Well, thanks for having us. I've seen a bunch of you guys in the past for different occasions, and it's always fun to see what you all are up to. First of all, I want to give the New England Mosaic Society a big shout out because you guys are super organized and do a lot of stuff regionally that I know other parts of the country are just envious of. I live in Washington, D.C. We can barely get together for lunch, like once a year, you know, so good for you guys. The YouTube channel has been around for a surprisingly long time. It's been almost 6 years. And Kim and I just kind of started it as a way to having to stop answer the same questions. That's how we started it. Because we would both get a lot of the same kinds of questions, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so, but we didn't have a plan, and it was really disorganized. And now sometimes I think, oh my God, we've created a lot of answers, but a lot of confusion. So we actually spent a lot of time, and Kim did a lot of this organizational work of making it make more sense. And so it's a little more organized. And now we're able to really point people to show them the answers to what we think are very specific questions, and sometimes projects and different things. Because it's pretty fun, and people are really very appreciative of the effort. And we're making this stuff anyway. So, you know, we have a lot of fun. It's an excuse for us to get together twice a year. We only see each other twice a year to do this. But it's been pretty fun and pretty rewarding. So in the process, we also created 8 kits, because something Kim and I talk about a lot is I think something really difficult sometimes for folks is to understand or to find the place where they can enter the mosaic world, because we all come to it with a different story, right? Broken dishes, or you went to Italy, or gee, I lived in South America, or whatever. So we really wanted to create a situation where people had a comfortable place that they could step into the mosaic game, the mosaic making world. Is that about right, Kim?
Yeah, I think so. The second part of it for Bonnie is Bonnie and I, because we've been doing what we do for a long time, and we get a lot of questions just because people were either formerly our students, or because in my case, I sell materials, whatever, and they've made something and now it's falling apart. And then they get said, oh, but I watched this YouTube video, and then we go out and watch it, and we're like, yeah, well, no wonder it fell apart, because some of the information that is out there just like is not correct, right? So it made it easier for both of us to go have the video and go, this is how to do it right. And, you know, like Bonnie said, we didn't have a plan. Bonnie sort of started doing it before me, and then I sort of got integrated somehow, I'm not sure. And it just kind of began growing. And we just want to answer people's questions in a visual way, because I can type 10 paragraphs and no two people are going to get the same information out of it as they do when they see you do it hands-on. And also, you know, before COVID, we didn't have 92 online classes to pick from, right? And so it was easy for us to share this with somebody in Arkansas who's never really going to have an opportunity to take a class. they have more opportunities now, but not everybody can afford it. So they can learn something by just watching.
Mhm.
Okay. So, Bonnie, do you want to start by addressing Chris's question about sculptural forms for mosaics? You want to?
Sure, sure. So Amy sent this to us. So is this person in the room? Amy, do you know?
Yes,
who
I think
asked this
she is.
question? So you can unmute, because the other thing, the way Kim and I typically do our talks is that interaction is really great. So it's okay to unmute and pop up if something that pertains to what we're talking about we like the idea of conversations too. Okay, so
And so whoever's
Okay.
piece this is, it would be good if we were directly
available.
interacting with
So
them.
I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see this picture that we received. So this is the piece that someone was working on. So, and I looked at it and said, gosh, I don't quite know where to begin with what to say. But Kim said, oh no, I got this. And so
Wow, look at that.
and she had a story about it, because I think this is really ambitious and I fundamentally like the shape.
I like it too. It's all great. And you've already, I'm not really sure who I'm talking to at this point, but you've already put a lot of work into it. Here's my experience. I live in Wisconsin, and we have a lot of concrete sculpture parks here that have been done by various people that just made stuff in their backyards that become these vernacular artists that now we're all going to see their stuff. Fred Smith is one of them, and he made all of his structures out of wood, and then did basically the same thing of covering them with either chicken wire and or hardware cloth, like in this case, or whatever wire he had handy. So it's all good in the beginning, but what happens is eventually that wood deteriorates out of the inside, and it creates a void that water is allowed into, and then in a freeze thaw climate, it will freeze and thaw and break whatever concrete you put on the outside of it. So I'm not discouraging you from finishing this. I'm just saying you need to be careful with it. And I would use any good polymer fortified, like sand mix, that you can buy at Home Depot as your concrete, a sanded aggregate, not a stone aggregate. And instead of water, I would be using what they call milk, and I'm not sure what the name is at Home Depot or the big.
Oh, so milk, so is there, it's a liquid that looks like milk, but it's all these polymers. It's like liquid plastic.
Right.
So it's really common in tile shops. And you can amp up mixtures.
Right. So in the old days with thinset, and still today with concrete, they add these polymers, just like what we get already in our bags of thinset that we buy that say they're polymer fortified. They mix that in separate. So I would replace part of the water, a good portion of the water, with the liquid polymer, which is in the cement department at Home Depot. I just can't bring the name up. I would also encourage whoever this is to buy Sherry Hunter's concrete garden ornaments book.
Yeah, and I'm going to put the link to that on Amazon in the chat when I'm done sharing. I'm going to do that so you guys have it.
Because it just gives you a really good understand, even if you don't use her specific method, right? It just gives you a really good understanding of working with these wire armatures and concrete mixes.
Yeah, and actually the book has a lot of formulas in it, so it can be really, really helpful. So I put a link in the chat, so if anybody wants to copy that, you can. It's a good investment, is her book.
Great. And Bonnie and Kim, I'm going to interrupt for a moment. Linda's asking for a bit of an explanation of the image that we just saw. Chris, since you're on the phone, could you
Yep.
just tell us how you made what we just saw and what it's intended to be?
Yeah, what I did was I took wacky wood, which is a bendable plywood, and I experimented with a shape. I made a circle, and then I just started twisting it to see what would happen. So if this unraveled, it would actually be a full circle. And I was trying to make an infinity shape, and this is just part of playing around. And the reason the wood is in there is because that's how I got the shape, by working with the plywood. And so then I wanted to mosaic this, of course, why not? And I, was reading about metal armatures that I was concerned about it being over wood. And I also didn't know how to get this shape without having the plywood.
Yeah, it would be a bit challenging. I will say, like, you could replicate this with Wheatie board by cutting slices so that it will bend, but it's never going to bend like this board that you have is.
Yeah.
So at this point, like I said, I'm not saying throw it out. What I'm saying is be aware of the consequences of how you started, right?
Yeah.
The people like Fred Smith and several other people who've done huge sculptures with wood and cement and wire is that when you live in a freeze thaw climate and you don't bring it in and you don't do this and you don't do that, it's going to deteriorate. So either you accept that fact,
Yeah.
or you take care of it, right? I mean, I have things that I bring in every year because I know I didn't make them right, and that's just how life is. So for me, if I was going to try and do this, I would use the sand mix at Home Depot. That's sand and concrete, not stones and concrete. I would use the milk. I would get a coat on it, and now my next coat would be alkyd resistant fiber tape, like joint
Yeah.
tape. And I would do a few coats over the top of this, at least.
Okay.
So Chris, you know what that is, like that AR mesh tape? It's a really good idea because I was just thinking about a workshop I had sat in with Megan Walsh, who makes these really wacky substrates. She's using diamond lath, but she actually takes that diamond lath and bends it like crazy.
Yeah.
And then she ends up covering it with that AR mesh tape and a couple of coats of thinset. And now that's her substrate. Because the more layers of that sort of stuff you're putting over the wood, now the more protected it is, and the stronger the whole structure becomes.
Right. I think it'll be fine. Like I wouldn't give up on where you started. I just wouldn't approach the next one the same.
Yeah. So will the sand mix actually like adhere without like just falling off? I can't do the whole thing at once, I'm assuming.
No, you got to mix it a little thicker, and the polymer makes it stickier.
Okay.
It's like mortar mix. If you watch a brick mason, that's actually stickier than it looks, right?
Okay.
It's kind of like thinset. So we're not quite as advanced as thinset is, but I wouldn't want to do the whole thing with good thinset, because not saying it's not possible. I just think I don't trust thinset over a certain thickness, right? That's not what it's made to do. It's made to be like 3/8 of an inch thick, and that's it. I mean, if you did choose to use it, it's also a more expensive option than buying a sand mix and a jug of polymer.
Yeah, because I knew I had to also be concerned about the object flexing. If it's not it's not very big, it's only like 12 inches wide there.
Does it flex now with the wire on it?
With the wire and the wood, yeah, it still has a flexing to it because
you're
the
gonna
plywood
have in stages.
Yeah.
Because the flexing is gonna make it difficult for you to get a coat on the whole thing at once. Until you get one coat on that whole thing,
Okay,
you know, lay it in a way that you can do, you know, something without it doing much, and then that'll get stiff, and then flip it and do another part. And every layer you put on
Okay.
there, whether it's mesh or it should be mesh, some kind of mesh and concrete.
okay,
And the last one you can do with Thinset, you know, like once you get this all covered with that sand mix, then you could just move to AR mesh and
And-
Thinset.
okay,
Once you have it stiffened up.
okay, all right. It's a first adventure for this kind of thing.
You don't know if it's gonna work till you try.
That's right.
Mhm.
And so now you have to widely post photos when you finish it by
Yep.
Christmas.
Okay,
You have to send it to us especially. You know, like I'll tell everybody all the time about myself too. A lot of what I do is an experiment. The difference between my kind of experiments and yours is like I have a really long history of construction materials, so I tend to overbuild instead of underbuild things. So everything takes practice, and I have some things that have failed. So
mhm.
All right, Amy, do you want to move us on to another
Yes,
question?
sure. This question has to do with what adhesive could be used for glass mirror. And this person wants to know whether Weld Bond or a neutral cure silicone can be used for glass mirror.
Well,
Yeah.
do you know about the neutral cure silicone, Kim? I've just been hearing about it. I've never used it.
yeah, I don't know. We're working on some mirror things here right now because we lost a supplier, and now I need to find new mirror. But so the thing about mirror is there's like silver oxide coated, aluminum oxide coated. There's a lot of, and then there's old mirror and then new mirror that you buy at the store. So I never feel comfortable giving an answer to the question because Weld Bond will work on pretty much anything as long as you're putting it inside. It's not going to do anything to the mirror. I don't really know that much about neutral cure silicones, and I know, you know, a fairly good amount about mirrors, and they're all not going to react to all things the same. And so my advice always is, I don't know if it's gonna, I don't really have advice. I just don't know what's gonna happen because I don't know what the mirror is, the backing is. Like none of us do when we buy mirror.
Right. And some things, you know, we have a big building in Baltimore that's covered completely in mirror. And now it's 20 years old and it's all patinaing, right? So the adhesive is eating away the silver on the back of that mirror. You know, and you look at it and one side of me says, oh, well, that kind of stinks. And the other is like, yeah, but that's kind of cool. You know, it's just the nature of the beast. I had one time researched with like a company that actually does like big glass and mirror cuttings for bathrooms. And the guy there said, well, what they were using to protect the back of the mirror was a sealant, right? That you could buy this spray on sealant, but that they actually didn't use the spray on sealant because they deduced that it was really just shellac and that they could put that shellac on the back, but you also had to put the shellac on all the edges. So if you cut a pile of tessera that were like 1-inch squares, what a pain in the neck, right? I'm like, no, I'm going to let it patina and let Mother Nature have her way with it.
That's kind of how I am when I work with mirrors. It's like, okay, whatever. Yeah, they also say that the epoxy based thinsets also don't affect most mirror products, but again, I'm not going to be the one that says that to you and have your glittery thing 5 years from now be all patinaed and antiqued, and you know.
And remember back in the day, like in the 70s, when mirror installations were really popular as an architectural thing, right? Remember those 12 by 12 mirrors, they'd be on the ceilings of weird hotels and stuff. I was never there. They actually use a product called Mirror Mastic, which you still can buy at Home Depot in big caulking tubes. And it's like a construction adhesive. And in theory, that mirror mastic doesn't eat the patina. But like Kim said, I think it's so hard to say, because it's like the quality of anything. Something cheap is going to fall apart way faster than something that was a better grade formula, and all the materials that went into making that mirror are just better. In the end, just use gold, just use Smelty. I know where you can get some.
Okay. Here's a whole series of questions on Thinset. Can Thinset that has been stored in an airtight and watertight container be used past the expiration date? What issues might they experience?
I would use it unless it's hard as a rock. If I feel like
I put my hands in it. Louise, no. Sorry. I put my hands in it. If you can feel any amount of like little grainy pebbles in it, I would not use it. And I have a couple things that failed, so I try not to use it. I'm not going to say I haven't went past the expiration date, because I do it all the time. But for me, it's a feel of what it feels like if it's hot. Because also be clear, Home Depot, people who work at Home Depot and whatever, they don't even know what they're doing a lot. And those pallets might have got dumped off a truck and sat in an open area with the plastic ripped off for 6 months before they moved it in. So I like check the bag that it's not hard when I buy it. And then when I get it home, I check the bag again that I can't feel any graininess in it, because if it's not really powdery, it's absorbed moisture out of the air from somewhere. It should be really powdery. It should not be any little
granularly, yeah.
granules in it.
So if they it's past the expiration date, but it's still granular, then
Not granular. It's really powdery. Then I would use it.
powdery, then you could use it. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying? Okay. Okay. If you're using different tessera that are multiple heights, how do you get the right depth of Thinset?
Gosh, we've been talking about making a video on that one for like 4 years.
Yeah, we're making it next time.
God.
So first I need to know the application. Like, are you putting it on mesh first, or what are you doing? Or are you just gluing it direct? Because it's a different answer.
I think, Betsy, this was your question. Could you unmute if it was your question? Betsy?
She unmuted for a second, but then muted again. Betsy, are you
Okay.
there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, what was my question? I think you had asked a question about if there were tesserae of multiple heights, how do you get the right depth when you're using Thinset?
Okay, yeah, because I always use too little. So, but
Little?
sorry.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Oh, I always use too little. And so I have a lot of thick tesserae, but then there's also some really thin ones. So I never know if I'm spreading it, how to compensate for that difference in height.
Are you working direct
Yes,
and you're using Thinset?
sometimes I hate it, but yes, I'm trying to use it.
Don't be hating on the Thinset. I would just build it up, and then I use what I call a bridge, right? So a tile setter would use a bridge that goes across two pieces that are the height you want the thinner piece to be. And then when you push it down, it makes it all level.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. sort
Yeah,
of.
so back buttering, you know, and just kind of building it up.
Okay, so from the back buttering the tesserae so that is where you make the compensation.
Yeah. Now, Betsy, the other way to do this, let's say you want to do a floor medallion, would be to build it in reverse, which sounds way worse than it is, but that's building the mosaic face down on brown paper with flour paste.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're applying your thin set to the back of that. That's going into the hole in the floor or even just on a board. But that's how installations, a lot of stuff comes from other countries, like Italy sending big church pieces to Washington, D.C. It's coming paper on paper in the reverse method. And then that's actually mounted, and then that paper is soaked off, and then it's really flat. So that's a very
Okay.
common way, the other way to do it. And it's not as awful as it sounds. You kind of get used to it. And it's easy to make changes. The flour paste is really easy to work with, and you just make it in your kitchen. And we do have a video about doing that small scale. So that's another option for, gee, I really want this tabletop to be flat, but I want to use these 4 different thicknesses.
I encourage everybody that does mosaics just to pick a project and do it, because just like a small thing, you don't have to do this gigantic thing like you're doing an installation, which is typically what it's for. Just like do something small and do it.
Oh, of the reverse method, you mean? Yeah.
Right, exactly. The
Mhm.
other thing I wanted to say about the thin set thing is, was it Betsy?
Yeah.
Is your project for inside?
Yes.
Okay, I want you to try using some premixed thinset for your inside projects, because I think you'll hate it less. Because you don't have to mix it, and you can just open the bucket and scoop some out.
Okay.
And it's thick and has body like real thinset, and isn't runny like Weld Bond. So you can build stuff up. I use it almost exclusively on all my indoor projects.
Okay.
It tints well, it's strong, and it's easy to work with. It's called Simple Set.
Yeah, actually, Betsy, I'm looking it up, and I'll put a link to it to Amazon. You can get it at Home Depot, but I'll put a link to Amazon in the chat so that you can see what the container looks like.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, this pre-mixed thin set is actually really good. It just can't go outside.
If you're just doing, like I said, I use it for almost all my interior work because I don't have to go through the mixing process, and I'm not really wasting anything. And it comes in like a 1 gallon bucket, I think. And if you keep it snap shut, it stays good.
For like ever.
Pretty
And
long.
it also takes colorant really well.
Right.
Because I'll pre-mix a bunch. I use a lot of black, but you could do any goofy color with pigments, and it cures out to be the color that you see when it's wet, which is really nice if you're really persnickety about that. So it's a very viable, convenient product, and it's a great way to learn a bunch of thin set tricks.
Right. The other thing I do is when I take some out of the bucket to work for that day or on whatever project, I just put it in another snap lid container, but a tiny one, like the tiniest little Gladware ones. And I can just, if I'm adding color, mix it, and I can just scoop in it with my palette knife, and, you're not working out of the big bucket and the powder with the thin set.
Oh, and the hose and the clean in and all that. So
Bonnie.
this is a great question about mastic.
Yes.
Yeah. So how is the pre-mixed thin set different from mastic? They are very different products because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but from what I understand, the thin set has aggregate in it, sand, right? And mastic does not, and mastic cannot take high water. Where for interior work, that premixed thinset, it can't go outside because of freeze thaw, but that premixed thinset can be used in a shower. Okay, but mastic, from what I understand, can't be.
Mastic is just like a totally different animal. It's very like creamy. There is no aggregate. It's not as strong. It doesn't have nearly as much body to it. Now, mind you, I did a bathroom sink with it, you know, and my mom even said, why are you using that damn mastic for that? And fortunately, it's our own sink, but it's been there for 15 years and it's holding up. Would I do it with that again? Absolutely not. I probably wouldn't even do it with the premixed thinset. I probably would have used the real deal.
Yeah.
However, it gets brittle over time. Like we've all been in an old bathroom and it's like brittle and it just gets old and cracks and stuff falls off. I just am not a mastic fan.
And it can't be used, you know how a popular aesthetic these days is in fine art pieces is to have large negative spaces that are the thin set. But you can't use mastic that way because more than like a half an inch, it cracks like really quickly, like within a week or so. So so it can't be used in that manner at all.
Okay,
So they're really different products.
let's move on. This is another question about adhesives. What is the best adhesive for outdoor mosaics using stones and rocks?
Thin set.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Someone is making an outside mosaic on a weddy board, and she's asking what adhesive she should use and what glass can withstand the freeze thaw cycle.
It's always going to be thinset. If you're going outside, I'm probably never going to give you any other answer unless it is on some kind, unless your backing is some kind of composite like fiberglass or something.
Metal, yeah. And thinset comes in two colors. So if you're using glass, like stained glass, which I've done a lot outside, just use white thinset. It costs a little bit more, but then it doesn't mess with the caliber of the color of your glass at all, because now your glass is backed with white. So
It's a little bit more reflective than if you use the dark thinset. But if you're questioning what one to use behind what glass, just put it on two different color surfaces and it gives you a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
You know, a light and a dark surface.
Mm-hmm.
And like all glass is vitrified, right? So it's been brought to a high enough temperature that in theory, all glass can go outside.
It can.
So
It's really some of the china and porcelain that you need to put some water on, and if it absorbs, then you don't use it.
Right.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Somebody is interested in knowing how to frame weddy board for outside.
Oh boy, that's a whole thing. So Witsen actually does make these really nice frames, and they do custom frames. That is because I just ordered some, right? So that's an angle iron of some sort. They are either aluminum or steel, depending on the weight and the size, and that the weddy board can then be, so they're specially engineered to take the weddy board. Sometimes we don't want to do that, right? And so what I've done with some pieces that are unframed is done some sort of support system on the back, so that now I have weather friendly something that I can put another hanging system into. And then do the edges of the weddy with the AAR Mesh Tape, which is very labor intensive to do. So because I feel like I'd rather just buy a frame, because you want to cover up those edges just so that you don't see the blue. Now, Kim and
I think so first it's an aesthetic question, right? Do you want it framed? Because if you don't want it framed, then you have to finish the edge a different way. Or if you want a small frame or a big frame or whatever you want to do.
Right.
The most important thing that you need to decide is how you're going to hang that up
Mhm.
before you ever start. Because you can hang a 3x5 piece of Wheatie board with tile on it and no frame around it. All you have to do is put the correct brackets on the back of it, right? If you have good smooth edges, it can be as simple as painting them out black if you want and not caring, just paint them. Or you can wrap them, like Bonnie said. You know, it's just really how much work you want to put into it. And we do custom frames. Any of you that have worked on a SAMA marathon project have seen them, because we always make the frames for those projects. And, you know, you can either call me about them if you really need them, or you can, I can kind of tell you how they're made. And if you have a friend or somebody that knows how to weld aluminum or steel, they can weld you a frame.
So just one thing I want to say about those wetty edges. So I've talked to Wetty several times over the years about, okay, do I really have to do all this work to these edges? Because they as the manufacturers say, you have to put the AAR mesh tape around them and mud that. And now in theory, that's tile ready, it'll accept some grout, whatever. But in conversations Kim and I have had, it's like, but this doesn't really make any sense, because there's nothing in these polystyrene products, in any of them, that's going to degrade, right? And that's why now I've just started painting those edges when I'm not going to do anything else to them, because there's really nothing that can degrade in them the way that they're manufactured. What happens with a lot of manufacturers about a lot of things, and Wheatie board is one of them, you know, right now, if you pull a data sheet, some of those data sheets say Wheatie board is not rated for exterior. Nothing has changed about that product except fear of litigation. That there's just fear of litigation. And so they put all these disclaimers out there, but there's nothing that's going to degrade about that product outside. There's nothing that's going to degrade about it on the edges.
That's helpful, Bonnie.
What happened, I just want to elaborate on that a little bit, is what happened is 15 years ago, only contractors were buying all these products, right? That supposedly knew what they were doing. But now all these products are available to the public, more so through Home Depot and, you know, wherever. And those people don't necessarily know what they're doing. And so in order to kind of cover their butts with them, they're just saying, yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question in the chat from Carol, just asking if you can explain the wrapping that you do when you do the wrapping. She's saying she usually just puts Weld Bond on the blue foam and then covers it with grout. And I see Karen's hand. So after that answer, Karen, you can ask your question.
Actually, I'm just going to put a link to the YouTube video we actually made about the how you can do those wetty edges so that you can watch. So we actually show you that with the AR tape, how we wrap them. So that might help you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, because the idea is I think, is to kill the blue, right? It's blue polystyrene inside, and we don't want to see that blue anymore.
Yeah, I tend not to be an edge wrapper, because I'd rather paint it out and touch it up if I need to, because when you start moving it around, it's too easy to bang into something, and then you're knocking that off and whatever. So for me, it's just like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to either frame it with something so I can't see it, or I'm just going to paint it out. And anything under 16 inches square, feel free to buy an easy frame from my website, because that'll be all framed up nice for you when you're done. And go
Okay,
out.
so Karen, I'm going to have you ask your question, and then Amy, I think you have a few more, and then there's at least one in the chat.
Okay, great. My question actually kind of ties in a lot of these pieces right now that we're discussing, which is why I raised my hand in real time. So I'm thinking about doing a house number for my house outside on Wetty, and we're talking about framing versus non-framing and sealing the edges. So I assumed I was going to do a piece of Wetty. I was going to use Thinset on it, since it's going to go outside where it's going to get wet. And I assumed before I had a conversation, I was just going to seal the entire thing with Thinset.
I wanted to talk about the mesh a little bit.
On the sides, But what I was also going to ask relating to Carol is, should I wrap it in mesh and then set and then put my tests on it to seal it all up?
Should you? But
So it sounds like a lot of work.
right.
Sounds like a lot of work. Your timing is fabulous because you know the most recent video we posted is the house number. So I'm going to post that link in the chat because I think you're creating a lot of extra work for yourself that maybe is the house number. Are you looking to do a unique shape, or are you looking?
No, luckily it's a small piece. It's only 2 numbers in the house, but then with some framing and decoration on it. I guess my simplified question is, can I just seal it all with Thinset? We're talking about the open blue exposed sides. I was just going to cover it all with Thinset, so it's encased.
No, because the foam, the polystyrene won't accept the Thinset. And that's why we have to wrap it. So what the Weedy manufacturers said to me is, oh, but that's how we make it tile ready when you wrap the AR mesh. So now in theory, you could tile that edge with little tiny tiles. That's why now it'll better accept grout because now it's got something to grab onto. When it's just the polystyrene, nothing's going to grab onto it. Some paint will soak into it and lay on top of it, but nothing's going to really stick to it in the long run.
Yeah, the mesh becomes just like the mesh that's in the slurry over the face, because you can see that there's mesh on there. When you look at a piece of Weedy board, it's a layer of concrete over mesh. So that's the same thing you're doing to the edge by adding the AR mesh and the Thinset to it.
I've done Lynn, who was selling Smalty on the Cape.
Mhm.
Does anybody know Lynn?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
told me years ago to just paint the edges with Weld Bond, let it dry, and then wrap my grout around the edge of the board. And I have pieces that have been outdoors, big installation pieces for 10, 15 years, and the grout stays on there fine.
You're
It
lucky
seals-
because that Weld
it
Bond is
seals-
water soluble.
No, I know, but it seals somehow it seals the blue board, you know,
Yeah,
and then the grout goes over it, and
that's
I
a
don't know,
good,
it's
that's
been
a good
fun.
trick to know.
It's been fine, so.
Yeah, that's good to know.
I think that I've said this in many of my classes and other like talks I've get. If you ask 10 different mosaic people how to do the same thing, you'll probably get at least 7 or 8 different answers. I personally would not use that method, even though I know Lynn and I believe you that it's been out there. I just think it's too susceptible to getting banged off.
Okay.
That's how I feel about it.
I like the Epoxy Sculpt comment that somebody wrote as well, because any of us who have used Epoxy Sculpt understand that it's a fundamentally life-changing product on countless fronts, right? Because you can like fix your vacuum cleaner, your electrical system, or put a frame around your Weedy board. I guess for me, why I wouldn't use it is because I'm thrifty and Epoxy Sculpt starts to get expensive. But I think it's actually a viable, it's epoxy. It's a really strong, wonderful product.
Okay, let's move along. So a few people said that they wanted to make small batches of Thinset. And if you're coloring the Thinset to make a unique color, what's the best way to do that so that each batch is the same color?
You make a whole lot at once with when you're right. So if I'm gonna do something and I need it to be all one color, or even just to do black, because unless you've kept really strict formulas, it'll be 15 different versions of black, right? So I'll take maybe like a big gallon bucket and make whatever color, a lot of it. So I have plenty. So I'm going back to that bucket of powder I'm making my little yogurt container full to do my little art piece. And then I can keep going back to that. Versus every time I run out, stopping and having to get the colorant, and then I'm measuring and I'm getting kind of close. Then I just have a batch that's consistently
Mhm.
the same.
Okay, and then do you use the powdered colorants or?
Yeah, I hardly ever use the liquid because I want to do things like make that bigger bucket of a color. I don't have as much trust in those, those colorants that Saccrete makes, they're for stucco, they're for concrete, that Sherry Warner Hunter carries. They're really designed for these cementitious, this concrete product. And so I kind of like to I prefer to honor that than going in there with a tube of acrylic paint. Have I gone in there with a tube of acrylic paint? In a fix, but I'm not proud,
Okay.
So about the brand, I see that in the chat about that. Is that the next question about the brand? For the most part, there aren't a lot of brands of powdered colorant around. I have been working for like the last 9 months to try to get a new colorant in because the colorant that we were all buying in powdered form that doesn't come from Sherry Hunter, they just stopped doing it. So now I have to replace that in smaller size packages for my customers because everybody wants colorant. So there are some colorants in the concrete aisle at Home Depot. So if you're doing black, it's easy, but the rest of the colors are like buff and brown and rust, and they come in bigger containers. All those colorants can be used in your thin set. Outside of that, then, I'm pretty much sending you to Sherry at this point because there's not a lot of powdered colorants out there that are for concrete type mixes.
And so part of why you want to use a proper colorant, particularly if you're going outside, is that's going to last longer. Those colorants aren't going to fade over time like other things you might use. They're designed for stucco, these colorants. They're
yeah, and they will stay, but they're even at that, they'll still fade. Even the best of them will fade. And this is a big reason why you won't find any red grout anymore. I can't, like all the grout manufacturers went away from anything that was a real color because it fades out. Even the best grout, I grouted a table navy blue, it's just gray now.
Yeah, that's kind of a universal thing about exterior mosaics, is for all the great stuff we want to do with them. And I think unless you use epoxy grout, which is what Sherry Warner Hunter uses on those large, things like hospitals and stuff, it fades. And so it's almost like after 10 years, all grout outside is now gray. Between weather and the big nasty is pollution.
And the sun. UV rays, man.
So there's some brands that have stuff in them, like Latacrete's Permacolor has a lot of really good ingredients in it. And I've been using that the last several years. And that's stable for longer. But I have a big piece in my backyard that's probably 15 years old. And yeah, it's not red grout anymore. It's kind of a weird gray beige.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left. Amy, how many questions do you have left to ask?
I have maybe 3 or 4.
Okay, and there's still at least one in the chat. So why don't we run through those, make sure we can get at least some answer to them.
Okay, all right. What is the best adhesive to use on glass projects?
That's a tough one. I don't do a lot of glass on glass, but the last time I did a big one was I actually used MAC glue, MAC glue, which I think sometimes has manufacturing challenges. I know they had a problem during COVID. And a lot of people use silicone, but I do think silicone over the long haul may yellow.
The Lexel doesn't yellow.
Lexel, yeah.
I don't do a lot of glass on glass either. And, you know, it depends on where you're putting it. If you're doing it inside and your pieces are small, feel free to use Weld Bond.
Mhm.
But anything over a half an inch, because I've had projects, I started in stained glass. On glass was one of my first big projects, and I had it over a heat vent for like a month before all the Weld Bond went clear. I think the Mac glue works pretty good. It's runny and it takes some getting used to, and it doesn't come off. So you kind of need to commit more to it once it's dry, where I know I can get the Weld Bond piece off if I really want it off. And I feel like the silicone type things, even Lexel, which doesn't yellow, it's hard not to have bubbles under it. So if you're doing glass on glass, it's all about it being translucent, right? And if you see the bubbles through it, it can be distracting. So I think it's one of them things each person kind of has to work out for themselves.
Mhm, mhm. Emily, why don't you ask the chat question and we'll go back and forth.
Okay, we've got two in the chat, but one of the early ones. So the question from Susan is, what would you put on a backsplash over a stove to protect the mosaic? And so Susan, I don't know if you're still on, but is the question about some like a sealant, something to cover it? Yes, I see a thumbs up.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
So
especially the grout.
So
All right.
what material are you using for the backsplash, meaning tile?
Mostly glass.
Okay, so we know that's not going to be sealed because nothing's soaking into it, right? So the grout, I recently did my splash behind my stove and my sink, and I bought Tech Products grout, which most of the, and mind you, it was not cheap, but it is like has sealant in it.
Mhm.
Like that grout is evolving, like every year new stuff comes out, and a lot of the grouts now do not need sealing. I've never been a big proponent of sealing because I always feel like the stains get in the sealant and then I can't get it out because they're in the sealant. If they're in the grout, I can get almost any stain out. I can't get it out of sealant because it's an artificial product. So I just buy the best grout I can buy.
Yeah, and
And
Susan, where you are, I think you guys can all get Laticrete from tile distributors. Their Permacolor line is very much like the tech line that Kim was able to get in Wisconsin. And those grouts, yeah, they do cost a lot more, but you didn't have to spend any time doing any kind of sealant. And they also have UV protectants. There's a bunch of stuff in it that's going to make that grout last and look better way, way, way longer. So to me, that's a worthwhile investment.
yeah, because even if you pay $20 for the grout instead of 40, now you're still going to pay $16 for the sealant, and you're still spending all the money, and you're doing twice as much work. And I've had more problems with sealant than I have without sealant. That's my personal choice.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you. So we have another question in the chat up from Sandra. The question is about, she says, I use direct method with Smalty using Weld Bond on board. I create the image freehand first without adhesive. Can you suggest a way to transfer the freestanding image as one piece instead of one Smalty at a time? Does that question make sense to you, or would you like clarification?
Well, it does. It's tough because that Smalty is not flat. That's the beauty of the material, right? So it's
Oh,
tough.
what Smalty are we talking about? Is it Italian Smalty or?
Yeah, it is. Italian.
Okay.
So one of your members, Cynthia Fisher, she is really brave in how she does this. And now I've inherited one of her students, and she showed me some tricks, and it kind of sort of works. So what Cynthia might do is she might take frosty contact paper. It's very specific, right? That frosty kind, because of a bunch of reasons. And she'll put that over mixed media mosaics that she's laid out.
Mhm.
And she'll just really hard sandwich between two boards and with a friend, and they'll just flip it. And then they'll flip it and she'll peel that contact paper off, and like 90% of the pieces are kind of sorted in place. Like she flips it over into the mud bed or into a Weld Bond bed.
Mhm.
And once I got used to it, so now when I do these face tape methods, it's particularly with glass, I use that frosty because it comes off way better than
Mhm.
hacking tape or the regular contact
Great.
paper.
I'll try that. Thank you.
Impressive that,
Move it around, right? Like if you're
yeah,
making something big, like you're just doing a small thing, you're not doing a giant thing. Or even if you were doing a giant thing, you would have multiple people. It's not like you're taking it to the job site, right?
yeah.
Right,
You
right.
have
No, it's
to
a
be-
smaller piece.
Right.
And just take a picture of it in case you drop it during
Yeah,
the flip.
Yeah. Okay, good idea. Thank you very much.
I like to work
So
direct.
Amy, I think you're up with our last questions.
Okay. Do you have a video that is like a refresher on thinset? Because there are questions here about how do you get a good consistency? How thick should you spread it? How to check for even thickness? Things like that.
Oh, your lucky day. I'll put a link in the chat box. We actually have a
Okay.
whole playlist about thinset. So I think the vast majority of your questions can get answered across like 5 different videos, how to mix it, what to look for, just all kinds of stuff. So that I think that might help you.
Okay.
I will just say as a general rule with your adhesive, when it comes to thinset, is that your thinset needs to come a quarter to a half inch, not a half inch, a quarter to a half up the thickness of your tessera, right? So if your tessera is a quarter of an inch thick, then it should come up an eighth of an inch around the edge. For me, that's only an issue when I'm like troweling it on a whole thing and sticking the tile on. Most of the time I'm working with a palette knife and I'm spreading it around. It just needs to be thick enough to hold it on. And if I'm gonna grout it later, it needs to not be so thick that it's squishing up. Like don't overthink it.
Right. That's great party
Glue
words.
some stuff down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Well, I think there's some really good questions tonight. I will send out the recording to everyone who registered, as well as all the links in the chat. Any last comments from folks?
I just realized I was sitting in the dark.
I would like to say thank you to both of you. This has been wonderful, and I'm sure more questions are going to come up for all of us over time, but this was a great casual.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to answer the same questions for a whole bunch of people at once instead of my normal job is answering those same questions like 20 times a week to 20 different people. So
You guys should go on the road with this. All right.
Well, thank you. And you guys, really, I salute you that you guys are so great with your level of organization and having meetings and exhibitions. It's really awesome and very inspiring.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All
Take
right.
care, guys.
Have a
Bye,
great night,
everybody.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.